The first time Tessa Morrow woke to find a man sitting at her fence line with a rifle across his knees. She nearly put a spear through his chest before recognizing the silhouette of her neighbor and his hound. She stood in the doorway of her cabin, barefoot on the cold planks, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her tusks. The pre-dawn air bit at her skin, raising gooseflesh along her arms. Behind her, Isolde and Marta slept on, curled together in the single bed they shared, oblivious to their mother's terror. Tessa had managed 3 hours of sleep. 3 whole hours without jerking awake at every rustle, every crack of a branch, every owl call that might not be an owl at all. Now this. She crossed the yard in long strides, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. The man did not turn. His dog, a shaggy gray beast with intelligent eyes, lifted its head and wagged once as if they were old friends. They were not. Tessa had spoken perhaps 10 words to Henry Wayland since he had moved onto the abandoned Pritchard property 6 weeks ago, and none of those words had been an invitation to sit armed outside her home in the dark. "What are you doing?" Her voice came out harsher than she intended, roughened by exhaustion and fear. Henry turned slowly, unhurried. His face was weathered, maybe 40 years old, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many suns. "Watching. I did not ask you to watch. No." He settled the rifle more comfortably across his lap. "You did not." Tessa's fingers tightened around the spear shaft. She had carved it herself from ash wood, and the weight of it was as familiar as her own bones. "Leave. Sun will be up soon," Henry said, as if she had not spoken. "You should get some sleep." "I said leave." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression made her want to turn away. Not pity. She could have borne pity with the contempt it deserved. This was something else, something quieter. "I will leave when the sun is full up," he said. "Not before." Tessa opened her mouth to argue, to threaten, to do whatever it took to make him go. But Isolde called out from inside, a sleepy question, and Tessa had to turn back. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, spear in hand, looking between her daughters and the man at her fence. She went inside. When she emerged an hour later to start the fire for breakfast, Henry Wayland was gone. Only the flattened grass where he had sat remained, and the faint scent of tobacco from his pipe. Tessa told herself she was glad. The raids had started 2 months ago, not long after the thaw. Sheep at first, then chickens, then whole sections of fence torn down in the night. The human families in the valley spoke of wolves, but Tessa knew wolves. Wolves did not work latches or cut rope. Wolves did not leave boot prints in the mud. She had gone to the marshal once, a week-long ride to the territorial seat. He had looked at her paperwork, at the deed her late husband had won in a card game and signed over to her before dying of fever 3 winters past. Everything legal, everything proper. "Land disputes are civil matters," the marshal had said, not meeting her eyes. "You will need to hire a lawyer." "This is not a dispute. Someone is trying to drive me off." "Do you have proof?" She had boot prints. She had cut ropes. She had a slaughtered ewe with a knife wound, not teeth marks. "Proof it was a person, I mean," the marshal said, "not just proof of damage." Tessa had left before she said something that would put her in a cell. Threatening a territorial marshal was a crime, even when he deserved it, so she had started the watches. 3 hours of sleep, then up to patrol. Another 3 hours if she was lucky, then up again. Isolde was 8, old enough to understand that Mama was tired, but not old enough to understand why anyone would want to hurt them. Marta was 5 and asked every morning if the bad things had come in the night. Tessa lied and said no. The truth was too heavy for a child to carry. The second night Henry Wayland kept watch. Tessa did not confront him. She saw him from the window, a dark shape against the stars, and felt a spike of anger so sharp it stole her breath. Then Marta rolled over and flung an arm across Tessa's stomach, and the anger drained away into something more complicated. She slept until dawn. The third night, she lay awake, listening, waiting for the sound of boots on her porch, for the creak of her door, for whatever price Henry Wayland thought she owed him. Men did not give things freely. She had learned that the hard way, in the years before Gareth, and in the silence of the human neighbors after he died. But the only sound was the wind in the pines and the occasional huff of Henry's dog settling itself. On the fourth night, Tessa pulled on her boots and went outside. Henry glanced up as she approached. The moon was a thumbnail sliver, barely enough light to see by. "You should be sleeping." "It is my land," Tessa said. "My watch can be both our watch." She wanted to argue. The words lined up on her tongue, sharp and ready. But she was so tired her bones felt hollow, and the fence post was right there, and she found herself sitting before she had decided to. They sat in silence. Henry's dog came over and sniffed her hand, then settled at her feet with a grunt. The warmth of it seeped through her trouser legs. "What is his name?" Tessa asked finally. "Barley." "That is a strange name for a dog. He likes barley mash." Henry shrugged. "Seemed fitting." Another silence. This one felt different, less hostile. "Why are you doing this?" Tessa asked. Henry was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then, "Seems like you could use the help." "I did not ask for help." "No," he agreed. "You did not." "So why?" He turned to look at her. In the darkness his eyes were shadowed, unreadable. "Does it matter?" "Yes," Tessa wanted to say. "It matters because I do not know what you want. It matters because nothing is free. It matters because I cannot afford to owe anyone anything." But what came out was, "I have 2 daughters sleeping in that house. I know. If you mean them harm, I do not." His voice was flat, final. "I would never." Tessa studied him. She had spent 10 years reading men, learning the difference between the ones who meant what they said and the ones who lied as easily as breathing. Henry Wayland's face was still, his hands loose on his rifle, not the posture of a liar. "I will take first watch," she said. "You sleep." "I am not tired." "You have been out here 4 nights, so have you for 2 months. Tessa felt something crack in her chest, just a little. 3 hours, she said. "Then you wake me." Henry nodded. 3 hours. He leaned back against the fence post and tipped his hat down over his eyes. Within minutes his breathing had evened out. Barley's had too, the dog a warm weight against her shins. Tessa sat with her spear across her knees and watched the darkness, and tried not to think about how much easier it was to breathe. The morning brought Isolde and Marta tumbling out of the cabin in a chaos of questions and sticky hands. Isolde saw Henry first and stopped so abruptly Marta crashed into her back. "Who is that?" "Our neighbor," Tessa said. She was making porridge over the fire pit, stirring the pot in slow circles. "Mr. Wayland." "Why is he here?" Helping with the watch, Isolde frowned. She had her father's eyes, dark and clever. "I thought you did not want help." "I changed my mind." "Why?" "Because I am your mother and I do not have to explain everything." Tessa softened it with a smile. "Go wash up. Breakfast will be ready soon." Marta had no such reservations. She marched right up to Henry, who had woken when the girls came out and was now rolling his bedroll. "Are you going to stay, Marta?" Tessa said. "It is all right." Henry finished tying the bedroll and looked down at the little girl. "I am going home now, but I will come back tonight." "Why?" "To help your mama." "Why, Marta, enough." Tessa ladled porridge into wooden bowls. "Come eat." Marta obeyed, but she kept looking back at Henry with open curiosity. Isolde was more reserved, watching him the way Tessa had taught her to watch strangers, with caution, with readiness to run. It made Tessa's heart hurt. Henry picked up his rifle and called Barley to heel. "I will be back at sunset," he said to Tessa. "You do not have to. I know." He left without waiting for a response, Barley trotting at his side. Tessa watched him go and felt that crack in her chest widen just a little more. The routine settled in over the next week. Henry arrived at sunset, and they divided the night into watches, 3 hours on, 3 hours off. They did not talk much. Henry was not a man of many words, and Tessa had spent too long with only her daughters for company to remember how to make easy conversation. But the silence was not uncomfortable. She learned things about him in small pieces. He had come from the East, from a place where the land was so crowded you could not walk a mile without seeing another farm. He had fought in some war she had never heard of and did not ask about. He liked his coffee black and strong enough to strip paint. He whittled while he kept watch, small figures that he left on the fence posts. A bird, a rabbit, a horse. On the 8th night, he carved a small orc girl with her hair in braids and left it beside Tessa's spear. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. The detail was extraordinary, tiny fingers, the suggestion of a smile. "Which one?" she asked. "Marta. She smiles more." Tessa closed her fingers around the carving. "Thank you." Henry nodded and went back to his whittling. On the 10th night, the raiders came back. Tessa was on watch, Henry asleep against the fence post. Barley lifted his head a moment before she heard it, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Tessa went still, every sense straining there. Movement in the trees beyond the north pasture. She touched Henry's shoulder. He woke instantly, no grogginess, his hand going to his rifle in a smooth motion that spoke of long practice. "North tree line," Tessa breathed. He looked. Barley growled again, louder. "How many?" Henry asked. "I cannot tell, at least 2. They waited." Tessa's heart was a drum, but her hands were steady on her spear. Gareth had been a soldier before he was a card sharp, and he had taught her to fight. Not fancy, not pretty, but effective. The movement came closer. Tessa could make out shapes now, 2 men, maybe 3. They were trying to be quiet, but they moved like townsmen, not woodsmen, crackling through underbrush, stumbling on roots. "They are going for the sheep pen," Henry said quietly. He was right. The shapes were angling away from the cabin, toward the small pen where Tessa kept her flock. 6 sheep, the difference between getting through winter and not. "Stay here," Tessa said. "No, my land, my fight. Fight goes better with 2. There was no time to argue. The shapes had reached the pen. Tessa heard the scrape of the gate, the startled bleat of a ewe. She moved. Henry came with her, Barley a gray shadow at his heels. They crossed the yard in silence, using the cabin as cover, then the woodshed. Tessa's night vision was better than a human's, and she could see clearly now. 3 men, all armed with clubs. One had a rope, already fashioning a noose. "Thought you said she only kept watch till midnight," one of them whispered. "That is what I heard. Stupid greenskin should be asleep by now." Tessa felt Henry go rigid beside her. She put a hand on his arm, shook her head once. "Not yet." The men got the noose around a ewe's neck and started to drag her toward the gate. The sheep fought, bleating in terror, and the sound covered Tessa's footsteps as she came up behind them. "Let her go," she said. All 3 men spun around. The one with the rope dropped it. The ewe bolted back into the flock. "Back off," one of them said. He was young, maybe 20, with a patchy beard and mean eyes. "This does not concern you, my sheep, my land. It concerns me." "Your land," he laughed, an ugly sound. "Orcs do not own land, everybody knows that. I have a deed." "You have a piece of paper. There is a difference." The other 2 were spreading out, trying to flank her. Tessa adjusted her grip on her spear. She could take 1, maybe 2. 3 was too many, especially if they rushed her together. Then Henry stepped out of the shadows, rifle leveled. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "the lady has a deed, that makes it her land." The young one's face twisted. "This is not your business, Wayland. I am making it my business. You know what she is, I do. And you are siding with her over your own kind." Henry's expression did not change. "I am siding with what is right. Now put down the clubs and leave, or I will put you down myself." For a moment Tessa thought they would charge anyway. The young one looked angry enough to try. But the other two were already backing away, and after a long moment he followed. "This is not over," he spat. "I hope for your sake it is," Henry said. "Next time I will not be so polite." They disappeared into the trees, crashing through the underbrush like spooked cattle. Tessa waited until the sound faded, then let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "You know them," she said. "The one with the mouth is Cyrus Miller. His uncle owns the land east of here." Henry lowered his rifle. "The others work for him." "Why does he want my land?" "Your land backs up to the river, prime grazing. Old man Miller has been trying to buy up the whole valley for years." He paused. "I did not know they were willing to go this far." Tessa looked at him. "You could have stayed out of it. It would have been safer, probably." "They will come after you now, too. Let them try." The crack in Tessa's chest split open wide. She turned away before he could see her face. "Thank you. You do not have to thank me." "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." They checked the fence line, repaired the gate latch the men had jimmied open, and settled back at their post. But something had changed. The silence between them felt different now, charged. "You should try to sleep," Henry said after a while. "So should you." "I am not tired, liar," he huffed, a laugh soft and surprised. "All right, I am tired, but I can keep watch. We both can." So they did, sitting shoulder to shoulder as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead. Barley sprawled across both their feet. Tessa felt the warmth of Henry's arm through her sleeve and allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine what it would be like if this was not just desperation. If he was here because he wanted to be, not because she needed him. Then she pushed the thought away. She could not afford softness. Not when the fight was only beginning. Over the next 2 weeks the raids escalated. Twice more men came in the night, and twice more Henry and Tessa drove them off. The third time they brought dogs, and Barley fought with a savagery Tessa had not expected from the gentle hound. He took a bite to the shoulder but gave back worse, and the raiders retreated, leaving a trail of blood. Tessa stitched up Barley by lamplight, her hand steady while Henry held the dog still. Barley whined but did not snap, and when she was done he licked her hand with his rough tongue. "Good boy," she murmured. "Brave boy." Isolde and Marta had woken during the commotion and now stood in their nightgowns, watching. Isolde's face was pale. Marta's eyes were huge. "Are the bad men going to come back?" Marta asked. Tessa wanted to lie. The lie was right there, easy and comforting. But she had promised herself she would not treat her daughters like children when it came to their safety. "Yes," she said, "they will come back. Why do they hate us? Because they want what we have, and they think we are weak enough to take it from." "Are we weak?" Isolde asked quietly. Tessa looked at her daughter, at the fear and anger warring in her young face. "No, we are strong, and we will prove it." Henry said nothing, but his hand found hers in the dark and squeezed once before letting go. The next morning Tessa rode to the nearest neighbor, a widow named Agnes Cotter, who had been coolly polite since Gareth died and downright frosty since. But Agnes had lived in the valley for 30 years, and if anyone knew the truth about the Millers, it would be her. Agnes met her at the door with a broom in hand and suspicion in her eyes. "What do you want?" "Information," Tessa said. "About old man Miller." "Why?" "Because his nephew and his men have been raiding my land, and I need to know how far he will go." Agnes's expression did not change. "And why would I tell you?" "Because you hated it when the Pritchards left. You said they were good people, that the valley was worse off without them." Tessa met her eyes. I am trying not to leave." For a long moment Agnes just stared at her, then she sighed and lowered the broom. "You better come in." The story Agnes told was an old one. The Millers had come to the valley 15 years ago with money and ambition. They had bought up land piece by piece, sometimes legally, sometimes not. Families who refused to sell found their wells poisoned, their barns burned. The territorial marshal looked the other way. The circuit judge was Miller's cousin. "The Pritchards held out for 3 years," Agnes said. "Then their son disappeared, never found the body. They left a week later." Tessa's blood went cold, and no one stopped him. "How?" "He is rich and well-connected, and we are just farmers. Who would listen? I have a deed, legal claim. So did the Pritchards, did not help them." Agnes poured tea with hands that shook slightly. "I am sorry, I know that is not what you wanted to hear. What about Henry Wayland? Why did he not get driven off? He is human, and a veteran. Killing a veteran would bring federal attention even out here." Agnes looked at Tessa over the rim of her cup. "But you are not human, and you are alone." "I am not alone." "No." Agnes raised an eyebrow. "That Wayland boy has been spending a lot of time at your place. People are talking. Let them talk. I am just saying you should be careful. A human man and an orc woman, that is not something folks around here will take kindly to." Tessa set down her cup. "I am careful. I have been careful my whole life. It has not kept me safe." "Then what will?" "Proof," Tessa said, "and witnesses, and making enough noise that even a corrupt marshal has to listen." She left Agnes's place with a plan half-formed and rode back to find Henry repairing her fence. He had brought supplies from his own land, good strong wire and new posts. Isolde and Marta were helping, or trying to, mostly just handing him tools and chattering. Tessa dismounted and walked over. Henry looked up, shading his eyes against the sun. "You did not have to do this," she said. "Fence was falling down." "It was fine." "It was falling down," he repeated, a smile tucking into the corner of his mouth. Tessa felt her own mouth twitch in response. It startled her how easy it was. When had smiling become easy? "I talked to Agnes Cotter," she said. Henry's smile faded. "What did she say?" "That old man Miller has been running people off for years. That he is too rich and connected to stop." She paused. "That his nephew disappeared. I heard about that. Did you hear what really happened?" Henry was quiet for a moment, then drove another post into the ground with a decisive thud. "I heard rumors. Nothing I could prove. We need proof. We need to keep you and the girls safe first. We cannot keep watch forever." Tessa watched Isolde try to wind the wire and fumble it. "Sooner or later we will get tired or unlucky, and they will come when we are not ready." "So what do you want to do?" "Set a trap," Tessa said, "and catch them in the act." Henry studied her. "That is dangerous. Living is dangerous. I would rather fight back." He nodded slowly. "All right. Tell me your plan." They spent 3 days preparing. Henry rode to the territorial seat and filed a formal complaint, making sure the clerk recorded it in the log. It would not stop the marshal from ignoring it, but it would leave a paper trail. Meanwhile, Tessa visited every neighbor within a day's ride, telling them what was happening and asking them to be ready to witness. Most turned her away. A few listened. Agnes Cotter agreed to come if called, and so did 2 others, farmers who had their own grudges against the Millers. Then they set the trap. Tessa made a show of leaving for an overnight trip to the trading post, taking the girls with her in the wagon. But instead of going all the way, she doubled back and left Isolde and Marta with Agnes, who complained but agreed. Then she returned to her land in the dark, on foot, and hid in the barn. Henry waited at his own place, visible from the road. Just a man going about his business, no sign he suspected anything. The raiders came 2 hours after sunset. Tessa counted 5 of them this time, all armed, all moving with the confidence of men who did not expect resistance. Cyrus Miller was in the lead, and another man she recognized as his uncle's foreman. They went straight for the cabin. Tessa's first instinct was to charge out, to defend her home. But that was not the plan. The plan required patience. She watched through a crack in the barn wall as they kicked in her door, heard the crash of furniture, the sound of things breaking. Her hands clenched so hard around her spear the wood creaked, then Henry's whistle, sharp and clear. The signal. Tessa burst from the barn as Henry came from the trees, and suddenly the raiders were caught between them. More importantly, Agnes Cotter and the two other neighbors emerged from their hiding spots, lanterns held high, illuminating everything. "That is far enough," Henry said, rifle trained on Cyrus. Cyrus spun, saw the witnesses, and his face went white. "This is not what it looks like." "It looks like you just broke into this woman's home and destroyed her property," Agnes said loudly, "in front of 3 witnesses. She is an orc." "She does not have rights. She has a deed," Henry said, "legal and registered, which means she has the same rights as anyone. You have no proof we did anything." "We all just watched you kick in that door," one of the other farmers said. "Heard you talking about how you were going to burn her out." That was a lie, but Cyrus did not know that. His face went from white to red. "My uncle will hear about this." "I hope he does," Tessa said. She stepped into the light, spear in hand. "I hope he hears how his nephew is a coward who attacks empty cabins in the dark. I hope he hears how he got caught by an orc woman and a few farmers." Cyrus lunged for her. It was stupid and desperate, and exactly what Tessa had been waiting for. She sidestepped, swung the butt of her spear into his stomach, and dropped him gasping in the dirt. "Stay down," she said. He stayed down. Henry kept the others covered while Tessa and the farmers trussed them up with rope. They did not fight. With witnesses and a legal complaint already filed, fighting would only make things worse. "Now what?" Agnes asked. "Now we ride to the territorial seat," Tessa said. "All of us. And we make the marshal do his job." It was a long night and a longer day, but in the end the marshal had no choice. With 3 human witnesses and a written complaint, with Cyrus and his men caught red-handed, even corruption had its limits. The marshal arrested them, and when Old Man Miller rode in threatening lawsuits and worse, the marshal told him coldly that if he wanted to take it up with the federal court, he was welcome to try. Miller left spitting threats, but they were empty, and everyone knew it. Tessa, Henry, and the others rode back to the valley as the sun set. They were all exhausted, wrung out, but there was a lightness in the air that had not been there before. "You did it," Agnes said as they parted ways at her homestead. "I did not think you could, but you did." "We did it," Tessa corrected. "Thank you." Agnes nodded brusquely, but her eyes were warm. "That Wayland fellow," she said. "He is a good man." "Yes," Tessa said. "He is." She collected Isolde and Marta, who had stayed up far too late and were giddy with exhaustion and relief. They rode back in the wagon, the girls dozing against her sides, and found Henry waiting at the fence line. "Thought you might like some company," he said. "The watch is over," Tessa said. "We do not need it any more, I know." "So why are you here?" Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I want to be." Tessa's breath caught. "Henry, you do not have to say anything, I just wanted you to know." He turned to go, then stopped. "I will understand if you want me to stay away now. I will not bother you. Wait." He turned back. Tessa handed the reins to Isolde, who was awake enough to take them, and climbed down from the wagon. She walked over to Henry and stood in front of him, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his beard, the scar on his temple. "You took the night watch," she said. "I did not ask." "I did not want you to, but you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you needed it. Because you were so tired you were swaying on your feet and I could not stand to watch it anymore. Because he stopped. Because what? Because from the first time I saw you, standing in your garden with your girls, showing them how to plant beans, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. His voice was low, rough. And I wanted to help, even if you hated me for it, even if you never spoke to me again. I just wanted you to sleep. Tessa felt tears burn her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. I do not hate you. Good. I think, she stopped, swallowed. I think I might be falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying. Henry stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a real smile, wide and genuine and so full of joy it made Tessa's chest ache. I fell a long time ago, he said. Tessa kissed him. It was awkward, her tusks getting in the way, but he did not seem to mind. He cupped her face in his hands, gentle despite the calluses, and kissed her back like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, Isolde was leaning out of the wagon with a satisfied expression. I told you he liked you, Mama. Isolde. Well, I did. Marta owes me her dessert for a week. You bet on this? Tessa asked, torn between laughter and mortification. Of course we did. It was obvious. Henry was laughing, a deep rumbling sound that Tessa felt through his chest. She leaned into him, let herself enjoy the warmth and solidity of him, and thought that maybe, just maybe, she could let herself have this. You should come to breakfast tomorrow, she said. A real breakfast, not just sitting at the fence. I would like that. And Henry. Yes. Thank you, she said. For everything, he kissed her forehead. You do not have to thank me, not ever. They stood there in the moonlight, the girls watching from the wagon, Barley wagging his tail, and Tessa felt something she had not felt in years, safe. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn morning where you could see your breath. Tessa woke to find both girls already up and bickering over who got to set the table. He is just a guest, Isolde was saying. You do not have to put out the good plates. But he is Mama's sweetheart, Marta countered. That means good plates. We do not even have good plates. We have the ones Grandmama sent with the flowers. Those are chipped. They are still good plates. Tessa rolled out of bed, biting back a smile. Any plates are fine. Mr. Wayland will not care. Are you going to marry him? Marta asked. The question hit Tessa like a bucket of cold water. What, Mr. Wayland? Are you going to marry him? Marta looked genuinely curious. Agnes said you would. She said it to her chickens, but I heard. We have known each other for less than a month. But you love him. Tessa stopped. Did she? It felt too soon for love. And yet every time she thought of Henry sitting at her fence line, night after night, asking nothing, expecting nothing, just giving because she needed it, her chest went tight and warm. Maybe, she said. Someday, if he asks. He will ask, Isolde said with the confidence of someone who had it all figured out. He looks at you like Papa used to. Tessa's throat closed up. Your Papa was a good man. Mr. Wayland is good too. Yes, Tessa said softly. He is. Henry arrived at sunrise with a basket of eggs and a jar of honey. Barley bounded ahead and immediately got mobbed by Marta, who had been waiting by the door for the last 20 minutes. You came. Marta threw her arms around the dog's neck. I was worried you would not come. I said I would. Henry handed Tessa the basket. Fresh this morning. You did not have to bring anything. I wanted to. They ate breakfast at the table, all four of them, and Barley under it, hoping for scraps. It was strange and wonderful, this feeling of fullness. Not just the food, though Tessa had made cornbread and fried the eggs with wild onions, but the sound of Henry's voice as he answered Marta's endless questions, the way Isolde slowly relaxed and started asking her own, the way his knee bumped Tessa's under the table and stayed there, warm and solid. Can we show Mr. Wayland the creek? Marta asked through a mouthful of cornbread. Manners, Tessa said automatically. Marta swallowed. Can we, if he wants to? I would like that, Henry said. So they went to the creek, the girls racing ahead with Barley, Tessa and Henry following at a slower pace. The morning was warming up, the frost melting into dew. Tessa could smell pine and earth and the faint sweetness of late wildflowers. Your girls are wonderful, Henry said. They are loud. Wonderful and loud, he smiled. Marta has your stubbornness, and Isolde has her father's caution. He was a good man, he was. Tessa picked her way over a fallen log. He won this land in a card game and gave it to me so I would have something if he died. He said an orc woman needed security more than most. He was right. I am sorry you lost him, so am I, but I have the girls and the land, and that is more than a lot of people get. They reached the creek, which was running high and clear from the autumn rains. Isolde and Marta had taken off their shoes and were wading in the shallows, shrieking at the cold. Barley plunged in after them, showering everyone with icy water. Henry laughed and pulled Tessa back before she could get soaked. His arm stayed around her waist. It felt natural, right, like it had always been there. Tessa, he said. She looked up at him. His eyes were serious now, the laughter faded. I know it has not been long, he said, and I know you have been hurt before, but I want you to know that I am not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to. I am not telling you to. Good. He brushed a strand of hair back from her face, because I would like to keep coming to breakfast, and maybe dinner too, and maybe someday if you wanted I could just stay. Tessa's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her tusks. Stay, as your husband, if you would have me. Henry, we have known each other 3 weeks. I know. That is not long enough to decide something like that. Maybe not for some people. He cupped her face in his hands. But I have seen you at your worst and your best. I have watched you fight for your daughters, for your land, for everything you have. I have sat with you in the dark and the quiet, and I have never felt more at peace in my life. So yes, 3 weeks is not long, but it is long enough for me to know. Tessa felt tears spill over, hot on her cheeks. I am afraid, so am I. What if it does not work? What if it does? She laughed, a wet, shaky sound. You are supposed to be the practical one. I am being practical. Practically speaking, I love you and I think you love me, and life is too short to wait for the perfect moment. I do love you, Tessa said. The words felt huge, impossible, but also true. I think I started loving you the second night you kept watch, when I realized you were not going to ask for anything in return. I am asking now, Henry said. Marry me, Tessa. Let me take care of you and the girls. Let me sit at your table every morning and lie beside you every night. Let me be yours. Tessa looked at him, at this quiet, steady man who had given her rest when she needed it most, who had stood beside her when no one else would, who looked at her like she was not a monster or a problem to be solved, but just a woman worth loving. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Tessa kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, Isolde and Marta were standing on the bank, dripping wet and grinning. Does this mean he is going to be our papa? Marta asked. Tessa looked at Henry. He was smiling, his eyes bright. If you will have me, he said to the girls. Marta let out a whoop and launched herself at him, soaking his trousers. Isolde followed more slowly, but when Henry opened his other arm she stepped into it, and Tessa saw her smile, small and real. They stood there by the creek, the 4 of them and Barley, and Tessa thought that maybe this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of fear or hardship, but the presence of people who would face it with you. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, on a cold November morning with the first snow threatening in the north. They married at Tessa's cabin, with Agnes Cotter as witness and the 2 farmers who had helped trap the raiders. Isolde and Marta wore their best dresses, which Tessa had stayed up 3 nights altering. Henry wore a suit he had not touched since leaving the East, and Tessa wore the dress she had married Gareth in, because it was the only nice thing she owned and she thought he would not mind. The ceremony was short. There was no priest, just Agnes reading the words from a book, and Tessa and Henry promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When it came time to seal it with a kiss, Henry was gentle, mindful of the audience, but his hand on the small of her back was possessive and warm. "You are mine now," he said quietly for her ears only. "And you are mine," Tessa said back. They celebrated with a feast that was really just a large meal, but Agnes had brought a cake, and the other neighbors had contributed what they could. Barley got a whole sausage to himself, and looked like he had won a great prize. Marta ate so much cake she made herself sick, and Isolde danced with Henry while Tessa played Gareth's old fiddle, rusty but passable. When the guests finally left, the cabin felt too small and too big all at once. Henry's things were already there, moved over the previous week. His clothes hanging next to hers, his razor by the wash basin, his boots by the door. Isolde and Marta had been moved to the loft, which Henry had reinforced and made cozy with extra blankets and a lamp they could reach. They went up without complaint, tired from the day's excitement, though Marta called down 3 times to say good night before finally falling asleep. Tessa stood in the middle of the cabin, suddenly nervous. She had been married before. She knew what came next, but this felt different. Important in a way her first wedding had not, because she had been so young and Gareth had been a stranger. Henry came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. "You are shaking." "I am nervous." "So am I." She turned to look at him. "Really, really." He smiled. "You are the most amazing woman I have ever met. I am terrified I will not measure up." "You already have," Tessa said. "Every day since the night you first kept watch." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and led her to the bed that was now theirs. They made love carefully, learning each other, and afterward Tessa lay with her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat and thought she had never felt so content. "Henry," she said into the darkness, "thank you for taking the watch. You do not have to thank me. I want to. You gave me something I did not think I could have." "What is that?" "Rest," Tessa said, "and hope, and love." His arms tightened around her. "You gave me the same." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and for the first time in months Tessa did not wake at every sound. She slept through till dawn, dreamless and deep, and woke to find Henry already up and making breakfast for the girls. Winter came hard that year, with snow up to the windowsills and temperatures cold enough to freeze the water in the basin overnight. But the cabin was warm, the pantry was full, and there was always someone to share the work. Henry taught Isolde to whittle and Marta to track animals in the snow. Tessa taught him her mother's recipes, complicated orc dishes that required patience and a good nose. They worked the land together, mending fences and chopping wood and hauling water from the creek when the well froze over. And every night they went to bed together. And every morning Tessa woke up grateful. In the spring, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She told Henry one morning over breakfast, casually, like it was no more important than the weather. He dropped his fork. "Pregnant?" "Yes." "You are sure?" "Very sure." He stared at her, then let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around the cabin. Isolde and Marta cheered, Barley barked, and Tessa laughed until her sides hurt. "I am going to be a papa," Henry said, setting her down carefully. "Again." "I mean I already am with the girls, but we know what you mean," Isolde said, grinning. "Can we name the baby?" Marta asked. "We will see," Tessa said. The baby came in late autumn, a boy with Henry's eyes and Tessa's green skin. They named him Quentin, and he was loud and healthy and utterly perfect. Isolde and Marta doted on him shamelessly, fighting over who got to hold him, and Henry walked around in a daze of happiness for a solid week. "I cannot believe he is ours," he said one night, watching Quentin sleep in the cradle he had built. "Believe it," Tessa said. She was exhausted, sore, and happier than she had ever been in her life. "You are stuck with us now. Best trap I ever walked into." She swatted his arm, but she was smiling. The years rolled on, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. The valley slowly changed. More families moved in, drawn by the promise of cheap land and open sky. Some were kind, some were not, but the Waylands had a reputation now, and people thought twice before causing trouble. Isolde grew into a serious, thoughtful young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Marta stayed wild and loud, always bringing home injured animals for her mother to fix. Quentin was a happy, easy child who followed his father everywhere and learned to whittle before he could write his name. And through it all, Tessa and Henry kept watch over what they had built. Not with spears and rifles anymore, but with steady work and steady love. They argued sometimes, because they were both stubborn and neither liked to back down. But they always made up before bed, and they never let the sun set on their anger. 10 years after their wedding, Tessa stood on the porch and watched Henry teaching Quentin to ride. The boy was 8 now, all long limbs and earnest concentration. Henry was patient, correcting his posture, praising his progress. Isolde was inside, reading to Marta, who had broken her ankle falling out of a tree and was bored out of her mind. Barley, old and gray now, snoozed in a patch of sunlight. Tessa felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Agnes Cotter, who had become a regular visitor over the years. "You look happy," Agnes said. "I am," Tessa said. "I am glad. You deserve it. So do you." Agnes shrugged. "I had my time. This is yours." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Henry and Quentin circle the yard. Tessa thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, sleeping in shifts, trusting no one, carrying everything alone. She barely recognized her. "Agnes," she said, "do you remember when I came to you asking about the Millers?" "Of course. You said I should be careful. That people would not accept me and Henry." "I remember. Were you right?" Agnes considered. "Some people never accepted it, but more did than I thought would, and the ones who mattered stood by you." She paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because I want to remember," Tessa said. "I want to remember how hard it was, so I never take this for granted." "You will not," Agnes said. "That is not who you are." Henry finished the lesson and sent Quentin to water the horse. Then he walked over, muddy and sweating, and kissed Tessa like he had not seen her in a week instead of an hour. "What was that for?" she asked, laughing. "Do I need a reason? I suppose not." He grinned and went inside to wash up. Agnes followed him, muttering about young people and propriety. Tessa stayed on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Henry and Tessa lay in bed and talked the way they always did. About the garden that needed weeding, about Isolde's plan to travel east for school, about whether they should expand the sheep flock. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Tessa asked. "When you sat at the fence line, all the time." "What made you do it?" "I told you. You needed help." "There is more to it than that." Henry was quiet for a moment. "I saw you," he said finally, "really saw you, and I thought if I did not do something I would regret it for the rest of my life." "Do you regret it now?" "Not for a second." Tessa rolled over to face him. His face was lined now, his hair more gray than brown, but his eyes were the same, steady and true. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." They fell asleep like that, facing each other, and in the morning they woke to the sound of Quentin shrieking because Marta had put a frog in his boot. Isolde was trying to mediate and Barley was barking and the cabin was chaos. Tessa looked at Henry. He looked at her. They both started laughing. "This is our life," Henry said. "Yes," Tessa said, "it is. And it was good." One more spring came, and with it, a letter from the territorial governor. It was brief and formal, informing them that the Pritchard case had been reopened and Old Man Miller had been arrested for murder. Cyrus Miller had turned evidence in exchange for leniency, and the whole ugly history of the valley was finally coming to light. Henry read it aloud at breakfast. Isolde and Marta listened with wide eyes. Quentin was too young to really understand, but he knew it was important. "Does this mean we are safe now?" Marta asked. "We have always been safe," Tessa said. "But yes, this means no one will try to take our land again." "Because Papa stopped them," Quentin said loyally. "Because Mama stopped them," Henry corrected. "I just helped." "You both stopped them," Isolde said. She was 17 now, preparing to leave for school in the fall. Together. Tessa looked at her eldest daughter and felt a rush of pride so strong it stole her breath. "That is right, together." After breakfast, Tessa and Henry walked the property line, something they did every spring to check for damage from the winter. The fences were solid, the fields ready for planting. Everything they had built was still standing. "You remember what you said to me?" Tessa asked. "That first morning when I found you at the fence, I said a lot of things. You said I should sleep, that you would watch. I remember. No one had ever said that to me before." Tessa stopped walking and turned to face him. "No one had ever offered to carry the weight so I could rest." "You deserved rest. Maybe, but I did not think I did. I thought I had to do everything alone or I was weak. You were never weak. I know that now." She took his hands. "Because you showed me that asking for help is not weakness, that letting someone stand beside you is not giving up. That love is not a burden, it is a gift." Henry's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Tessa, I just wanted to say thank you one more time for taking the night watch, for staying, for loving me even when I made it hard." "You never made it hard," Henry said. "You made it worth it." He kissed her there in the middle of their land, surrounded by everything they had fought for. And Tessa kissed him back and thought that maybe this was what happily ever after looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and hard-won and theirs. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and when they reached the porch the girls were waiting with Quentin. Isolde had her traveling trunk packed, ready to leave for school in the morning. Marta was sulking because she would miss her sister. Quentin was trying to convince Barley to fetch, which the old dog was ignoring with great dignity. "There you are," Isolde said. "We thought you got lost." "Just walking the fence line," Henry said. "Again, you walked it yesterday, and we will walk it tomorrow." He ruffled Quentin's hair. "Some things are worth checking twice." They went inside, and Tessa started supper while Henry helped Quentin with his letters. Marta sat by the window and watched the road, waiting for nothing in particular. Isolde read by the fire, Barley at her feet. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special. But as Tessa stirred the pot and listened to her family around her, she thought that ordinary was a kind of miracle. That peace was something you built day by day, with small kindnesses and steady love. That night after the children were asleep, Tessa and Henry sat on the porch and watched the stars. The night was clear and cold, the first hint of summer warmth still weeks away. "You think Isolde will be all right?" Tessa asked. "In the East, she is your daughter, she will be fine." "She is also your daughter, then she will be more than fine." Henry squeezed her hand. "She is strong and smart and brave, just like her mother, and stubborn like her father." "I am not stubborn." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "You sat at my fence line for 4 nights straight even after I told you to leave. That is not stubborn, that is persistent. It is the same thing." "It is not. They bickered good-naturedly, the way they always did, and then fell into comfortable silence. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, an owl answered. The world turned on, indifferent and beautiful. "Henry," Tessa said, I am glad you took the watch, so am I. Would you do it again? If you could go back," he turned to look at her. "Every time, in every life." "I would always choose you." Tessa felt her eyes sting. "That is a very romantic thing to say." "I am a romantic man. You are a farmer. I can be both." She laughed and leaned into him, and they sat like that until the cold drove them inside. They checked on the children, banked the fire, and climbed into bed. Henry was asleep in minutes, but Tessa lay awake a while longer, listening to the sounds of her family breathing. This was what she had fought for. Not the land, though that mattered. Not the house, though it was home. But this. The soft snore of her husband, the creak of the loft as one of the children rolled over, the thump of Barley's tail against the floor. Safety. Love. Rest. She had spent so long believing she did not deserve these things. That they were for other people, people who were not orc, not alone, not afraid. But she had been wrong. Everyone deserved to be loved. Everyone deserved to rest. And everyone deserved someone who would sit at the fence line and keep watch, asking nothing in return. Tessa closed her eyes and let herself fall into sleep, deep and dreamless. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not wake until morning. The sun rose, as it always did. The children woke, as they always did. Henry made coffee, and Tessa made breakfast, and they sat around the table together and argued about who forgot to close the chicken coop, and whether Quentin was old enough for a pocket knife. It was an ordinary morning, but ordinary had never felt so extraordinary. And when Henry caught her eye across the table and smiled, Tessa smiled back and knew that this was her happily ever after. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. Something real. A life built on steady hands and steady hearts. A love that asked for nothing and gave everything. A family that had chosen each other, again and again, through every hard season and every long night. This was the story Tessa would tell her children someday, and her children's children. Not about raids and rustlers and fights in the dark, but about the man who sat at the fence line and kept watch, who gave her rest when she needed it most, who stayed, and about the woman who learned, slowly and with great difficulty, to let herself be loved. It was a good story, a true story, and it was theirs.